All right, good. So here we are on threat hunting detection strategies and proactive defenses. Wait, let me just also go to the cloud. Cool. Right, so this is an Open Security Summit session in June 2024. I'm going to talk about threat hunting and detection strategy, and then with a big focus on the proactive defenses that we can do here. And so I got me. I've been a CISO for a while. I've been doing AppSec forever, right? And threat hunting. And I actually remember buying the Hacking Exposed book, right? The first edition, right? And then going,
Yep.
right, page one, the internet, let's scan. And I literally went through the whole book, right? DNS thing. It was really good. But yeah, so I do care about the attack and then as a CISO, the defense side of things. And Marius, quick intro, just quick about you, and then we kick start.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things probably is relevant to this topic. So obviously, I'm a CISO in the fintech business now, but previously I was building security operation centers, and I wrote my master's dissertation about how to leverage MITRE ATT&CK in building SOCs. And I think there's a key point in there was, in continuous evaluation of the SOC, there was a part about threat hunting, proactive defense and detection and all of that and evaluation. So there's a few points and a few things we can probably delve in today in that topic.
Very cool. So let's start with just maybe a definition, right? So when you think about threat hunting and detection strategies, right? The proactive defense in action. So in one of there's two, I would say, key principles that I really like. One of them is that you want a security model that is based on the attacker making a mistake, right? It's not a security model based on you have to defend everything and the attacker has the complete upper hand, yada, yada, yada. I like the model where we almost turn the heat into the attacker, where we rely on the attacker making a mistake and they're always going to make mistakes, right? And then the second key component is that even the most ridiculous exploit, 0-day, right in the middle of your data center, it doesn't give you an invisibility cloak, right? It allows you to teleport into your environment, but it doesn't make you invisible, right? And I think if you combine those two, you have a really good pattern, which is you rely on the fact that the attackers will make mistakes. They will make a call to something they're not supposed to, and on the fact that that will happen because they're not invisible. Doesn't matter how deep they go, doesn't matter how embedded they are in your infrastructure, eventually they'll make a call that they were not supposed to make, right? And I think for me, those two principles, when I talk about threat hunting and detection strategy, especially when you look at the proactive side, that's my key model.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things, obviously. I think it's an advanced piece of whether it's SOC, whether it's engineering piece work, but it's just sometimes people I think miscomprehend what threat hunting is. And first and foremost, it's not something that your SIEM normally detects. It's building a hypothesis and then going and testing and actually hunting for those threats where you mentioned is going outside of what your normal, SIEM or SOC use cases are, and then seeing, okay, let's think about where potential, threats could lie, where could potential, things could have been exploited and test. It's a whole different mindset and idea how you go about it. I think you need to sort of, it's a next level. You can't give level one SOC analyst and say go and threat hunt. It takes, I guess, years of experience to understand how attack chain happens and where you can go and hunt.
But it's also the best way to learn, right? It's like,
Well, yeah.
if
You
you
always
want,
have to start somewhere.
yeah. So cool, right? So now on the topic of what is the environment that you need to have, right, in order for this to sort of be successful, right? Like as a defender, what ideally do you want? What are the key, almost say, patterns and activities and visibility that you want to have in place in order to be able to do effective threat hunting?
I think first and foremost, obviously, without having visibility or without having, log sources, you ain't gonna be able to hunt much. But I think it's obviously it's a very big difference whether you are fully in the cloud or you are fully on the prem, because obviously log sources are increasingly becoming a cost burden to companies. And I think it's about understanding um, how these log sources or how some of these things could be stored. Because I'm a very big fan of automation. So I always say to people, you don't need to push 100% of logs into your SIEM. You only build the use cases and use the logs that are going to be effective. But then secondly, what you can do is you can recycle or build your logs, as in, you create rules. So say, for example, first 30 days of logs goes into your SIEM. When the log source, you build a rule. When the log source becomes 30 days old, you go into warm storage. After between 30, say, and 90 days, it goes into the cold storage. And then whatever, if you need a year's worth of logs, then say between 90 days and 360, it stays in cold storage before you delete it. So I think it's an effective management how you can reduce the costs,
Yeah.
because obviously you leverage the cost versus the access to it. So I think
So
that's
I like to do that the reverse way. So for me, the best model I've seen is a
Mhm.
model where as soon as you got a log source, you put it straight away into your storage environment, right?
Yeah,
So it could be S3, it could be blob storage, whatever. So it immediately goes on that path that you're describing it, which is the path to the kind of the glacier, right? Like the thing
yeah,
where, and technically you can store years and years, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. The advantage of that is that you have the raw logs, right? You have the raw logs, which in a way, from a security point of view, probably are very problematic, right? But
Yeah.
you can almost isolate that. And this is where I think the business model of the SIEMs, unfortunately, the first generation was based on consumption, which
Yeah.
rewarded them to get more data, which it should be based on value, which is like the least, we want to send the least amount of data, right?
Yeah.
And this is where the latest moves from, Google with Chronicle, Unlimited, AWS with the data security lake, which again, massive cost reductions, right, are very interesting, and others. And I think some of the other providers. But the logic there is that you take the raw logs, you save it into a storage straight away, right? And then what you do is you have a transformation or a series of transformations, right? That is what I call the sort of the SIEM pipeline. So what you then have is you then say, okay, what do I want to have on my 30-day view, right?
Yeah.
So even that should be a transformation already, right?
Yeah.
Even that should already be, I don't need all the data. I can already consolidate some of it. And yes, that might be more rich, but it's already a transformation from that CI pipeline. It
Yeah. Yeah.
also means that your SIEM entire infrastructure becomes disposable, because in principle, you should be able to delete all your SIEM, which I don't think anybody can really do properly, which is a massive problem, by the way, right? You delete the SIEM and then you start a new one, and you should be able to load the data, right, on demand, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
from that storage, right? And then I think you do what you described there, where you then have different transformations. So you can have a transformation which is my 30-day data, and then you have another transformation which is my 30 to 90 days, which, for example, can already be a massive reduction of the data points. It can just be aggregations, because at that
Yeah.
moment in time, like an interesting question, like, have I seen this IP address before? Have I seen this attacker? Well, in a way, there's a moment where you don't need the details. You just need to know, have I seen it? So you don't need all the data in the
Yeah.
scene at that moment in time. You just need enough information to say, yes, in the last 3 months, whatever, we've seen this IP X times, which is what you query, right? What I like about that is that you have a CI pipeline for your SIEM, and you can apply transformation. So when you need more data, you just replay it.
Yeah, you just said that. I actually, moved and rebuilt my sim about 6, 7 months ago from scratch, and it's not a problem. And I think that's the problem, is getting to the maturity level where you're pretty comfortable with moving things and rebuilding things,
Yeah.
and you're not attached. Because I've seen people how build sims or how they use it. You go to, for example, just simple example, Azure Sentinel. Plug everything on, turn everything on, just all the use cases, everything, from templates, everything on. And then you just see, alarms ringing left, right, and center.
Yeah.
Because, it just takes maturity to understand where your use cases lie and how do you need to how do you use threat intel. Because again, threat intelligence is another thing. You can plug in millions of sources, but we keep talking about, whether it's AI or something, but you need a sort of human eyeballs on the threat intelligence, because it
Well,
has to
let's
be.
get there. Let's just finish the log thing, because I think we started a good one. Let's just on the logs, right?
Yeah, yeah,
because you also said that there's a lot of companies who start with the logs, right? You collect the logs, right?
Yeah.
But there's also a ridiculous amount of horror stories, right? Of
Oh
companies who
yeah.
spend a lot of money, a lot of budget, and a lot of time to get to the log sources, right? And some of them are spectacular engineering capability, deliveries, right? It's almost like they delivered what they want to deliver, which is how to get the logs into the SIM, right?
Yeah.
And then they go and ask simple questions, and they can't.
Well, yeah, exactly. Imagine, something happened and forensics company comes in and they can't piece together an evidence because
Yeah.
there's pieces of the steps that are missing. And that's the key point. I think the one thing we need to address as well here, it's not only about having logs, but it's having consistency of logs between the environments. Because when you have an incident, you will be piecing together
Yeah.
environment by environment where the threat actor went, and the consistency and being able to build the full picture is a whole another heap of thing, because we all will know, well, you know things are not inadmissible in court if you're missing some of the pieces, because you can't prove that something happened when you have say an hour missing in the source in the logs.
So let's talk about that, because I think that's a really good topic, right? So the topic is, what is the best way to enrich the logs, right? How do we make sure that we have, in a way, good logs, right? And the key is to connect the data, right? And one of the pieces that I always find that is missing quite a lot is that a lot of these you do need to involve the developers and the DevOps people, and the engineers, because something simple, like sometimes you need unique tokens or unique IDs across everything. Because if you can't connect a request from here to there to there to there to there to there, then you're flying blind, because on each layer you just see aggregations. You don't
Yeah.
see, that thing coming from there. It's a bit like a lot of requests to API are not problematic unless I can track it to this unique source or this unique user or this unique IP address, right? And that's when I think sometimes there's a lot of engineering that goes into trying to figure out how to get good data, good insight out of data, where the reality is that, why don't you just speak to the devs, speak to the dev teams, speak to the cloud engineers, and get them to propagate that ID, right? It's like,
Yeah,
so you can
yeah,
actually trace it.
yeah. I think there's two things here in play is propagation of IDs. Yeah, because sometimes you are in one specific log, and UID or ID is obfuscated or something that's missing. That's another point. But I think is always, we keep talking about, not bolted on security, but designing security in applications. But I think working together with developers, there's another piece that's very important. They doing they're normally building sort of error reporting that allows them to
Yeah,
diagnose problems. If we can work with them as well,
yeah.
how we can diagnose security problems and potentially gain visibility into their applications, that's another huge benefit, that you can just get it straight away.
And I actually think that simple example, and I'll bring you in, that you just described, I think is, again, one of the big pieces that we miss, which is the developer teams, by design, only tend to have access to their bit, right?
Yeah.
And it's from political reasons, from practical reasons, historical reasons, companies' organization. It's almost like you follow the org chart and you tend to see what logs they have access to, right?
Yeah.
The problem with that is that, if you think about it, the developers need this as badly as we do, right? In a way, the developers need this actually probably more often than we do, because they have all these bugs to debug, right? So I think there's a synergy that we could have with developers, that if we work with the dev teams and again the DevOps teams together to improve the logs visibility, and it's almost like I don't need them to do this for security, right? They can just do it for their pure own reasons, because they need to debug their app better. But the side effect of that is you gain that visibility, you gain that context, right? And also then you have the relationships to go, hey, can you just add this bit of data here? Can you just add this set of metadata because we need it in security? And then you have that relationship.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you reckon, Nick? Can I bring you in?
Yeah, thank you. Well, and so many interesting points so far. But that last one especially, I was wondering if security as a security team tend to be that security mindset of like everything is need to know and everything is a risk. Everything is perceived purely through a risk lens,
Yeah.
whereas we can imagine the scenarios whereby people can misuse those logs and misuse access, but means there's all sorts of gains that we as cybersecurity people just don't think of. Especially like you said, is just we'll let them have access to the logs, and they'll figure out how are they useful, rather than you must provide a definite use case, you must prove it, you must go through this committee, you must, especially like you must not get excited about your idea, you must sort of formally blah blah, rather than well, this is a good idea, let's try it, we can turn it off. Exactly. There's so many, I don't know how to put it, unaccessed benefits there that people are missing out on because they've not just gone, well, we'll share logs, we'll see who can use it.
But even from a security point of view, if you think about it, right? What I like about, in a way, that openness is that immediately people go, oh shit, we really shouldn't have those secrets in the logs. You go, yes, you shouldn't, right? Why suddenly you start to introduce tokenizations, you start to introduce those transformations, because you then say, look, if we can address that at the source, not only we kill a massive amount of issues downstream, we can then share it freely, right? So I like this model because it promotes a whole bunch of new behaviors and also gives you a lot more eyeballs. I've done this before, and it's the own developers who are going, guys, we shouldn't be putting this in the logs, right? But then they know who to talk to. They can then make their own business case and add the pull request and create the function to say that should not be in the logs, right?
And that fits nicely in with, the whole privacy idea of if you don't collect the data, it's not at risk. Sort of ideally, your organization is compromised and kind of no one cares because what you've stolen is either tokenized or you just never collected it in the first place because you didn't need it. And there's so many security benefits to that. And like you say, so doing it the same way with logs and then sharing what's useful and omitting what's risky, sort of the word I think you've used a lot already, and we're not even half an hour in, is by design. To me, is the thing, is that whole shift left is used so often, but that whole think about the issues before you incur them, remove that risk from what the logs capture. It just saves so much time and hassle of so much of your organization for the rest of the time your organization exists, if you just slow down a little bit and think a bit smarter a little bit earlier.
Well, the proactive element to this, right? I think it is the key. And I think you just mention what I think is one of those really important topics, right? Which is like our relationship, like with the assets, right? So I always have this thing where sometimes even my own teams, when there's an incident and they're like, go that way, I'm going, guys, you wrong, you literally ran the wrong direction, right? I don't care about the asset right now. I care about those assets. Can you first take a look at those things over there, right? And I really like what you're just describing of there should be large chunks of organization that you just don't care. And it's not that you don't care because there's no impact. Well, there should be no impact, but it's also like, from a security point of view, from a risk point of view, the blast radius is very small, right? It's like that. I always like to ask the question when people have data, says, what will happen if I put that online, right? Like who would care if those logs end up online? And there's an interesting spectrum from, okay, there's some business value, or there's no value, there's some business value, there's some maybe intelligence from a business to there's compromise, there's customers impacted, or we go out of business. And there's literally there's a spectrum there, right? And I feel that on this, like one of the works we should be doing in a proactive for threat intelligence is actually the more we reduce the amount of assets that we care about, the more we know which are important. In a way, that's where you turn up the logs, monitoring, and the alerts, where the rest you're going, well, eventually we'll deal with that.
Yeah. I think just to add one more thing what we've been talking, I think there's also another piece which sometimes is missing in most security teams, because all developers have gone and run away towards agile development, whereas security is stuck in waterfall and they want to, review hundreds of documents and have the final say whether it's yes or no.
That's long gone, right?
You think it's gone, but it's not. It's most of the security teams how still operate. And the more we can, because I always say, I've been building as well, AppSec and DevSecOps frameworks and programs, it's not something that you can do overnight. The culture shift it requires, and the team restructuring and the build that how you can get those teams together, it's completely different, viewpoint. So again, moving towards that, collaboration piece and making sure that, you know, people understand how we can use logs, how we can enrich teams, and how we can make decisions quicker, and how we can, you know, get securities in those development sort of iterations that we can provide advice and support very quickly. Because I've even been, you know, in situations where I've been told, you know, oh, development teams are, you know, being slowed down by security. And it comes a point where, whether you like it or not, security becomes irrelevant. Yeah, it becomes a bypass. So you have to keep up with them to be relevant. And that's the key point, I think, where we need to move towards as well.
So here's the topic now, right? Do security teams need to have an engineering function, and do they need to have developers?
Well, it depends if you are building something in-house. If you are, then of course.
Well, I'd say no. Like, I mean, Marius is not afraid of speaking his mind, which is great. Like, quite seriously, I'm surprised you gave such a relatively gentle answer. I'd say no. Like, I mean, security vendors especially have such a poor history of development. I think it's much better that security people tell developers what to do. This is what we need. This is how it needs to work, and use the developers' knowledge of developing and engineering to build something better.
I agree, but I want to caveat that if you in the security team don't have an engineering function, right? Don't have people with development experience, don't have people that knows how to build those things, that is very hard to do. It's very hard to do because it's very hard to have a conversation, for example, with a developer. If you know a developer, it's very hard. And more importantly, it's very hard to say, look, I got this proof of concept working. Can you now make it scale, right? And I think if you don't have engineering resources and developers, you are just a consumer of either tools or whatever people create, and your area of activity is very limited.
Is that a function or experience? Because you used both interchangeably, whereas I'm really interested in sort of what people knew. And so they understand the concepts, they understand the problems, and they can talk the language, but they don't have to be able to execute the function anymore. It's
well, I think you need a function, man. In fact, I had this.
I mean, really abstractly, really abstractly with less experience than you, I disagree. So there's no foundation really, but just like that's like a vibes-based opinion I have. Is just I don't think so. I don't like everybody having to be everything else. Like people shouldn't understand security in their jobs. They just talk to security. That kind of idea. But go on. Sorry, go on.
So let me clarify what I mean. And yeah, look, when I mean having engineering function is that there's an org design of a security team, that there's nobody there that has development experience, knows how to code, knows how to do CI pipelines, know how to fire up in a Azure environment, right? You know, and every tool they have, they just tweak the tools, right? They don't build anything, right? Problem I have with that org design is that it's very hard to delegate. It's very hard to tweak things, and you in a way you're completely controlled by your vendors, right? Because the universe of what you can do is what your vendors give you, right? When I say you need to have an engineering function, is that in a way is going to what I think, Marius, you guys were saying, is that we need to know how to build pipelines. We need to engineer our security activities. But I want to caveat this to say everything you build on a security team should be designed in a way to be disposable and should be designed to be replaced by something that was built by, I would say, the proper engineers, right? Yeah. But to kickstart the process, what I found is that if you don't have development resources, right, to even take a SIEM, right? If you have a development resource to customize your SIEM, to write your queries, to write data transformations, to do that stuff, you're 100% depending on other teams who need to have those resources.
I'm gonna say as well. I mean, it really depends. As I say, I'm not necessarily development resources, but I believe that, or I prefer that some of these functions are owned by security, such as, for example, so I like security building code standard policies, which creates a standard deviation for how, for example, infrastructure should be built. So there are security standards within, say, how VM should look like. And if you deviate, it creates a violation. So you create policies, as well as, how CI/CD pipelines. Normally, I think it's a shared responsibility model, usually between, AppSec resource that builds stage gates that says high risky vulnerabilities do not go into the next stage of our CI/CD.
Yeah. And my point on that was that if you want to do that without engineering skills, it's very hard. I have to say, one thing that was quite successful was to literally take developers, right? Even not very experienced developers, no, but start of their career, highly enthusiastic, put them in a couple of security, roles, right? And it was amazing what they would create. Like they became some of the best SIEM analysts, some of the best AppSec engineers, some of the best risk professionals, because in a way, like it's development, somebody who does development, they understand a CI pipeline. They understand interactive development. They look at something and go, oh, I can code around it, right? I can build a pipeline on it. It doesn't mean that, a lot of the time that should become permanent, but it means that you have a lot of ways to unblock your pipelines, unlock your workflows. And you
What's your
don't
view?
engineer things.
What's your view, Nick? If you don't own an engineering, say, function, what's your view how you can influence other teams to do security sort of engineering work for you? Because the problem is that sometimes I see as well, when you outsource some of the support sort of work, obviously people got their own KPIs or their own metrics, and obviously security will be outside of that unless you are able to rewrite sort of their job specs. Normally security can fall by the wayside if you don't have your own resources to do that.
I think maybe I think maybe naively, or maybe no one's tried it as much as I think they should, is there's that combination between two different parties and two different mindsets talking to each other. I think it's called something like the analytical third, I think, in something like psychiatry. There's this, I mean, like the conversation we have now, it's not, there's something to this conversation which is the combination of three of us. In the same way, when engineering and security talk to each other, speaking a similar language and coming from similar-ish mindsets, that creates, to me, a different set of ideas than either engineering people learning security or security people learning engineering. I think, as simplistic as it sounds, running it through my head and wondering whether to say it or not, I think teams should talk to each other more, and companies need to give them the time to talk to each other rather than the sort of continual firefighting.
I think
it's very optimistic, and I'm speaking to two people who've done this much more practically than I have. So either I'm being naive or this is a great new idea. I'll let you two tell me that.
You know what I'll say, Nick? It's a great idea. And this is exactly what I've just finished reading the book called The Toyota Way. And there are great key principles in how utmost people respect and, scientific thinking, how it works. The problem is, in practice, you very rarely see that level of culture development that people are supported. Because Toyota Way, it explicitly says, Toyota, it will be their last resort to release or fire people. Whereas nowadays, whenever something bad happens, people or tech cuts resource, people are becoming as resource now. So it's very easily to get rid of resource. And that's where I think nowadays we're not building that kind of culture anymore that allows this great cross-team collaboration. Because sometimes I even see, for example, like you see in IT teams where people are so scared to make decision that might upset someone or might outshine someone that we are not moving anywhere. We're just being status quo.
Yeah, it's very much and excuse me looking away while I was looking at references. It's very much that organizations avoid failure rather than reach for success, and you can kind of understand why they do that. And especially in security, you can understand why organizations do that. But I think if you have an organization, you get that high level buy-in of, we're going to give you all time to talk to each other. We're going to assume the best of the future. We're going to bring in revolutionary concepts. Like, I mean, the things Dinis was discussing earlier, like an organization essentially has a crumple zone. Like if a whole part gets compromised, we'll just re-image everything, start again tomorrow. It'll be fine. Because we've thought about what data we acquire and where we keep it so intently, that organization would run so much more efficiently than all of its competitors. I think there's like I say, it's either naive or a real difference maker. I think there's so many advantages to an organization to work that way compared to how everybody else is working, especially like you say, retention, just the knowledge people have if they've been with an organization together for a few years, and the sort of feeling colleagues have for each other once they've been working together for a few years. I've worked for organizations where it's like, oh yeah, go ask Dave down the corridor because Dave knows everyone.
Yeah.
And just those kind of people are so valuable in ways you can't measure.
Yeah.
I think there's real advantages to organizations, but like you say, it's like I mean, it was very nice and polite. You said like it's a really nice idea. You didn't quite say but yeah, no one's sort of, it's not the bravery, it's the I don't know I don't know how to put it, but no one's got the sort of foresight to try that and risk sort of issues with their organization. But like I say, I always think just the gains you could make as a company compared to everybody else if you think a little farther ahead, give these teams time to talk to each other rather than expecting everybody to learn everybody else's knowledge, which seems to be more and more. And then they haven't learned it, or they make a mistake, and like you say, they just get fired, and you've just lost all that ability in a split second.
So one of the things I like when you operate at more senior level is how you can hack the organization to do the right thing. So one of the ways that you can promote that, collaboration, that getting together, discovering who matters, who doesn't matter, is, you've probably heard this say before, right? Is when you run a P3 as a P1, when you take a P3 incident, like a medium level incident, right? And you run it as a P1. And a really good way of thinking about this is there's a great documentary by Nicholas Means on who destroyed 3 Mile Island. And it's a really cool analysis of this nuclear accident that happened, right? And the bottom line is that what they look for was not the immediate things that caused the problem. They look at the root causes of the problem, right? Like, for example, they took a team that was, knew how to handle nuclear reactors in a submarine, and they put them running a nuclear submarine inland. Now, there's things that in a nuclear submarine that if it happens, this is a massive shit show, and if it doesn't happen, you don't care. And vice versa, right? And there's also things like the buttons and the alerts were completely wrong. So you had like the alert for a major failure next to the alert that the elevator was broken, right? Something like that, right? So it's almost like the design of the elements. And what I like about this idea is that when you run a P3 as a P1, in a way, Nick, you have that ability to collaborate because it's real, right? Like a good example is if a customer says, I've been compromised, my question is not how much money we lost, how big it is, how many accounts, what it is. My question is, why did we wait for the customer to tell us that something happened? So then things failed, right? On the way, we should have picked that up, right? We should have picked up the threat actor, right? On the way. So what you then can do is you can put people together. And sometimes I find that we should almost hire a psychologist, right, for our team, because we would get people together that they never met. We get people that should work together, but they didn't. But in that environment, it worked. And then what's cool about it is you do this several times, and not only you fix a bunch of stuff, which is by design, and that's why you have to run the P3 as a P1, because you need enough resources to do it. You get better. And in a way, you discover, that thing that you talk about, Nick, as who's the key person. Because I guarantee you, after 10 of these, we can totally tell the business who are the key individuals. Now, even the business sometimes didn't value that much, but we say, no, those individuals, they are the key. Because every time we needed to get something done, every time we had an issue, they were the ones that had the answer, right? And then you can manufacture those environments, right? Again, run a P3 as a P1, the benefits are massive.
Yeah, I think, Toyota Way says, ask the 5 whys. And that's what it is, not just for the sake of asking 5 whys, but going deeper. I think somewhere I read, I think Greg van der Gaas mentioned a similar example, in aviation, when the plane lands and there is 3 bolts missing, we don't just go and replace the 3 bolts.
We ask
try
why.
and find out why they're missing. Is there a fault at how the bolts are manufacturing or how they are put in? But in security, we're still doing, we're spending, that's why they keep saying, we're spending more money to address more vulnerabilities, more incidents, and we're just doing more firefighting because this, all the curves are pointing up. And unless we can actually remove the firefighting and actually go into the, actually addressing why the business processes are broken and what made them broken,
Yeah.
we're never going to get anywhere.
But to bring it back to, excuse me while I open my calendar slowly.
Yep.
I mean, to bring it back of the subject that I've you've been kind enough to welcome me to interrupt on threat hunting.
Yeah.
Feels like to me has always felt like the way to get beyond firefighting, because
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, just like you're trying to protect everything from everyone, with a set of vulnerabilities that, like you say, Marius, the curves are only going up. Threat hunting seems to be like a smarter way to fight that kind of conflict. Like I don't think anyone in, I think it's a cliche, anyone in the field of human conflict has tried to fight the way cybersecurity fights, which is literally defend everywhere against everything. So threat hunting seems like a way to, like you said earlier, I did scribble it down, Dennis. That's like you put the heat on the attackers.
Yeah.
You make it so that they have to think more, they have to be concerned more, and like you also said earlier, Dennis, like they're not invisible. And
Yeah.
especially this gets me about AI based attacks, is they're going to be so noisy because in general AI doesn't understand context unlike humans do, so they'll make more mistakes due to factors they've not understood, which generates a whole set of noise
Yeah.
you would hope humans detect. So I to me, I think sort of threat hunting is the way to get away from firefighting. You just need an organization that takes a step back, looks at everything seemingly on fire, and
Yeah.
says, we're going to ignore everything on fire, ignore the smoke, everyone, it'll be fine. We're going to threat hunt. We're going to see why to stretch the analogy too far, we're going to see why the fires keep starting and who
Yeah.
keeps starting them.
Yeah.
Seems to me to be the way to go. But I like these conceptual ideas. I don't know how practical that
No,
is.
they work. If you think about the red teaming, is based on that, right? What I like about threat hunting, right, and what I like about red teaming is that he operates on facts, right? It's kind of like, if you've done pen testing before, you probably have the experience of you call somebody going, look, I'm testing this system. What would happen if I did this? And they go, it's not possible. You can't do it. But just humor me. What happens if in this system there was this problem and I could do this? And they go, no, you can't do it. Then you go, dude, I just did that, right? So now what? Right. So what I like about the threat hunting and the red teaming, and also especially the hunt element, right, is that you leave all these facts behind, right? You leave all this evidence, right? Like I've done this, or even the attacker done this. Like, for example, you could say, look, the attacker got here, but when we hunted, he got there, right? So suddenly you go, whoa, that should have been detected. So now you have this chain of evidence, right, of actually what happened. And then you can go, why didn't we detect it? Why didn't we stop it first, right? What would have happened that instead of the attacker turned right, he turned left, right? So those things are quite interesting, right? Because in a way, the threat hunting allows you to go after the mid-level incidents, right? Because the big ones, everybody gets it, right? Like there's never a problem, right? Like the whole thing's on fire, you got the CEO, you got everybody in your back, right? You get whatever you want. That's never a problem. The problem is all these other ones, right? That's where the hunting comes from. It's like, ooh, that's a bit weird, right? Ooh, what is that going on? And then what you need is a couple of really cool success stories where you go, look, we just connected this with this, with this, with this, and look, here's a much bigger problem, right? And it's actually quite cool, right? From a security point of view, it's like it's proper, CSI investigation, right? But and it goes back, I think, to the fact that we need really good logs, we need really good data sources, we need a good relationship with the business to understand and for them to make changes, right, to their infrastructure so that we gain visibility, right? And then when we need the data, we can access it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, as you say, it's similar. Threat hunting is similar to probably red teaming. It's about building that loop of communication and the cycle, because obviously whatever threat hunters found, that should inform how we're going to tailor our defenses, and that's where proactivity comes. Whatever you discover, if you discover a hole, that should go into two ways. It should go into, obviously, first of all, gaining visibility and building detection use cases, but that can go into the program as well, where we can gain potential investment if we need tools, if we need support, or how we're going to rectify that potential risk. But I think, developing use cases, the proactive threat hunting can develop use cases for detection, and then obviously vice versa, building a program.
Absolutely. And you can continue, right? The advantage of, for example, even on our proactivity, say, look, the attacker got here, but if they have done that, look at how close we were to the crown jewels, right? And that's when you start to look at those cases. If that path didn't exist, then we wouldn't care, right? The reality is that there's a path there. There's a key that was on that server, and then that connects to this, and then that connects to that, right? So we need to start connecting those dots, right? But then we can focus on our defenses. So there we can focus on what should we really be protecting, and what's the kind of like, have you heard about the idea of the minimal viable company? It's a really cool principle, right? Where you start to map what do you need to leave standing up, right? If things starts to go wrong, right? And it's really cool, right? Like I remember once doing this thing where I sat with the CEO and I was basically said, tell me the list of countries in reverse order that I can shut down. Literally, the guy was like, okay, this. And then he mentioned like, look, if at least you can keep these 2 countries up, that would be great, right? But it was interesting because those 2 countries represented 90% of the profit. So suddenly you're going, right, it's almost like one of the things that I was doing recently is that we start to get these mandate to operate, where we get this permission from the business in advance, for example, to block a certain number of accounts, to block certain things, to do a bunch of actions. Yeah, we didn't get permission to brick the whole business, but we get permission to say, if we need at 2 o'clock in the morning to stop this, we don't ask permission to anybody, right? We can just do it up to an amount. Beyond that, you wake up a lot of people, right? But it's quite cool to start thinking on those permissions to operate, that what's the minimum viable part of the company, that as long as that's up, right, the business is not severely impacted.
Yeah, and I think our tools are kind of slowly moving towards that way, because now if you look, so I kind of use Azure quite a lot, but if you look Defender for Cloud now, instead of normal recommendations, it's building attack paths.
Yeah.
And now you can prioritize which paths are towards your crown jewels. This builds the priority instead of just 100 of recommendations and try and fix them all.
Well, it's the kill chain, right? It's that graph. You go, well, if I block that one, then I blow up the graph, right? Like in a way, like if you can disrupt the business model of an attacker, suddenly it won't scale.
People. I really like the concept overall of kill chain, pushing completely to one side the whole conversation about military concepts and terms in cyber. So just ignoring that. I really like kill chain, but the key is chain, not kill. Everybody gets focused on kill because it's a nice sounding word, and it's for want of a better term, it's the sexiest part of the phrase, when actually it's chain. Like you say, you break one part of the chain, everything else doesn't happen.
Attack chain, right?
It's of course, to break part of the chain you need to respond, which fits in with threat hunting, that kind of idea of we're around in our own network looking for you. We may not be able to see you, but you may not be able to see us, kind of fear that you inspire in your attackers, rather than like you just said, Marius, you just block everything, you just protect everything. Like just very, very quickly looking up, I love the idea of a minimum viable company. It's how evolution has worked with animals and humans. It's, well, I want to survive. I don't need that bit. I'll stop sending blood to it. I'll let that bit freeze or whatever. It's just, no, we need the entity to keep going and get through whatever it's going through.
And it buys you time, right? The important thing is, there's a lot of situations where actually security makes it worse, because we don't talk about this sometimes, but I have some cases where security actually makes it worse, right? Because from a business point of view, you had a business impact of this thing. As you block a bunch of stuff, and suddenly the business impact is that big, right? Where the reality is like, look, at the time it was actually contained, right? It was not good, but at least it was contained. It wasn't a freaking crisis, right? So again, like if you understand that part of the business can catch fire, right? That one can't. That's why I was saying that if there's an incident over there, you don't run first there. You run first there to make sure that there is no fire reaching it, and then you walk backwards from your asset, right? Instead of going to the shiny thing. And to be honest, Marius, when you said the attackers, the AI is going to be noisy, I actually think it's going to be noisy in false flag activities. I think they're going to learn to make a fuckload of noise over here to attack you over there, right? Because everybody runs to that to that big one because it's all everything is going red, but actually the real threat is flying under the radar.
Well, yeah, it's about, I think, learning the patterns, isn't it? Usually, everyone, all of us who's in security know full well that usually now how the things work is you get breach or you get ransomware, or you get all advisories come out on Friday at 4:55, just before everyone clocks up for the weekend. So, it's just, I guess, common, activities.
Yeah. Right, guys, in the last couple of minutes, Nick, any final thoughts on this topic?
Just yeah, loads to try and keep it really short. Partly really good ideas you're coming up with. Really like that. I mean, as always with the Open Security Summit, and just that whole idea of. I tell you what. Sorry, my main thought is we could have had this conversation 10 years ago and it wouldn't have sounded unusual, because I think people like us have been saying this kind of thing for a while. With the greatest respect, and thank you for bringing me in, Dinis, how do we make sure we're not having this same conversation 10 years from now? What's the marketing angle on this so that we can talk about different problems and different issues 10 years from now is my final thought, I think.
I'm going to say is with the kind of advancement of AI and all of this and how the current industry is moving, I think there's too much focus on technology and golden bullets. If we can keep pushing, first of all, is people, processes, and then technology. So organizations, those who can and are able to invest in their people in terms of training and bringing their level of scientific thinking into, proactive threat hunting, will reap much more benefits than buying tool that's going to be left unused. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's my thought.
So to wrap up, and I think to address your point, Nick, I for the first time I could see how we could pull this off, right? Like I agree with you. Like there was definitely a moment in my security career where I go, like, this doesn't scale, and that doesn't scale, and that doesn't freaking scale. How the hell are we going to pull this off? I think the AI element that I like, and the one I'm involved in, is not to use Gen AI to create content, is use Gen AI to understand content. So, for example, for the first time, we actually have the possibility to understand how our networks work. We have the possibility to understand how our flows work, how the structure works, because a lot of those visualizations, those graphs, even that chain that you had in the past was manually or was created through a huge amount of glued up code, where now we have, with the power of the Gen AI, the LLMs, is they can understand that level of complexity, right? So I actually think that we'll be in a very different place, and I actually think that we play this right, the defenders will really get a massive upper hand, because for the first time we can actually understand how the business works, which not only is going to add value for us from the defense point of view, it's going to add value to the business, because the businesses don't know how they work, right? And the developer teams have no idea how after 2 years of development things actually glue together. So I think that the security function has an insane value, right, to provide, if we can be that visibility engine, right, that we need in order to do everything we spoke here effectively. Thanks, guys. And so, Nick, what we're going to do is we're going to now, I'm actually trying to use Gen AI for this. Going to create a bunch of small little videos of this, and then we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.